Sonic the Hedgehog 3 may be rated an all-ages friendly PG, but that didn't stop Jim Carrey from delivering some dialogue that really hits below the belt. Among other things, only the grown-ups in the audience will catch. Before the final act of the movie, Sonic asks for Tom and Maddie's help to break into gun headquarters in London to stop the Robotnik's and Shadow's plan of world destruction. So Tom and Maddie make their way to the server room to turn off an energy force field that's preventing Sonic from entering. They must then insert a special USB thumb drive into Gun's main server to grant Tails access to the security system. Alas, it doesn't work, at least not at first. So Tom decides to blow into it, despite Tails' warning that it won't fix anything. But somehow the blowing works. This is obviously a reference to the 16-bit era of gaming from the 1990s, and the widespread belief that blowing into a game cartridge would help start up a game that wasn't booting properly.
Oh yeah! Oh my god! Oh yeah! Oh yeah!
But there's not much evidence that this blowing ever actually worked, and considering that most video games nowadays are either disc-based on SD cards or downloadable, there's an entire generation or two that basically has no idea what cartridges even are. The climax of Sonic 3 takes place on a giant space weapon called the Eclipse Cannon, as Shadow and Gerald Robotnik plan on using the station's laser beam to destroy the Earth as revenge for the death of Maria Robotnik 50 years earlier. But Dr. Ivo Robotnik isn't exactly on board with that plan, especially since it's a suicide mission. This leads to a fight between grandfather and grandson, during which Gerald reveals Cyber Scorpion attachments, while Ivo unveils Cyber Mantis arms. Eventually, Ivo uses his claws to cut off parts of Gerald's mustache, with Ivo quipping that he's doing some Mantis-scaping. This is obviously a pun on the term manscaping, which is just a fun word for the grooming and shaving habits of men. To get a little more explicit, manscaping often specifically refers to the shaving of pubic hair. Thus, this joke becomes a little risque for what's ostensibly a children's film, but at least it will probably fly over most kids' heads.
Look at them, they're silky and smooth.
As Team Sonic and their human allies attempt to infiltrate Gun headquarters, the Robotniks are doing the same to steal one of two keycards that will get their world-ending Eclipse Cannon weapon up and running. After a dance sequence in which Ivo and Gerald deflect the laser security system, they finally reach the secret gun vault with the keycard. Alas, they then wind up caught in a variable gravity room, possibly referencing one of the levels in the 2001 Sega Dreamcast game Sonic Adventure 2. This is the first time that the Robotniks meet Director Rockwell, who's decked out in black tactical military gear, like the other gun agents. This encounter prompts the 104-year-old Gerald Robotnik to exclaim incredulously about the existence of women in the military. It's obvious that Gerald is the butt of the joke here for his out-of-touch sensibilities. It's also something that a lot of younger kids probably won't pick up on, considering how long women have now been active in the American military. So if you get this joke, it means you remember a time when society was even more sexist than it is now. Ivo Robotnik is not in great shape when we first see him in Sonic 3. It seemed like he'd been killed off for good at the end of the second movie when his giant Eggman robot exploded after fighting the glowing yellow Supersonic. But Ivo somehow survived and is now living in an underwater robotic crab lair. He's overeating to the point that he's starting to more closely resemble his video game counterpart, and he's also become obsessed with a steamy telenovela. Eventually, Agent Stone brings Sonic and his friends to Robotnik's lair as he attempts to clear the doctor's name. It turns out that Robotnik was in fact not behind the recent attacks from his drones, and that an imposter has been using his technology. Robotnik then offers to help Sonic while also admitting that he has become undesirable to all possible genders. This is a surprisingly progressive viewpoint, especially from a villain like Robotnik. The implication seems to be that he's pansexual, or at least open-minded about anyone with any sort of queer orientation. But it's a small moment that's easy to miss if you're a kid, or just not paying attention closely.
I asked for a kick-ass franchise. Next thing you know, here I am.
Agent Stone is Dr. Robotnik's loyal henchman. Despite being a more than capable fighter, marksman, technician, and even tailor, Stone is never fully appreciated by the emotionally abusive Dr. Robotnik. And when Gerald comes into Ivo's life, Stone is immediately fired and kicked to the curb. Despite all this, there are some implications that Stone's devotion is more than just professional. These hints were present all the way back in the first film as well, as it was immediately clear that Stone was not your typical henchman. Usually henchmen are easy to manipulate, like Bebop and Rocksteady from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, or they're scheming and conniving like Starscream and Transformers. But very rarely are they smart, cunning, and loyal, unless there are also some romantic overtones. This connection between Stone and Robotnik is never made fully explicit in any of the movies, so it's easy to miss if you're too young to be in the habit of shipping your favorite characters.
He's back! He's back!
Since the gun headquarters is located in London, the Sonic team is able to speed their way through some iconic landmarks. When Maddie and Tom are compromised, Sonic has to quickly enter the facility before a force field surrounds the building and makes infiltration impossible. But first, he decides to have some fun along the way. This includes stealing crowns and jewelry from the palace, messing with the British royal guards, and recreating the cover of the classic Beatles album Abbey Road. He even manages to crack a joke at the expense of Ringo, referring to the drummer as the other one.
Peace and love.
Now, we don't mean to imply no kid has ever heard of the Beatles. After all, the Fab Four are probably the most famous and most influential rock band of all time. That said, they're not quite as ubiquitous as they used to be. A couple of them have been dead for decades, and everything fades away eventually. However, even kids who have been introduced to the Beatles by their parents or grandparents might not immediately clock a reference to a decades-old album cover, even one as iconic as Abbey Road. In the last act of Sonic 3, Gerald nearly destroys Earth with the Eclipse Cannon's laser until Sonic and Shadow stop the beam with their bare hands. However, the laser is too strong to hold on to for long, even with their strength infused by the Chaos Emeralds. So Ivo and Tails attempt to steer the laser away from Earth, but in the process, the laser cuts through the moon like a knife. This sequence is played for laughs, but it would actually be pretty catastrophic if something like this were to happen in real life. Pieces of moon debris would hit Earth like meteorites and destroy cities, tsunamis would cause devastating flooding, and extreme weather changes would lead to mass extinction events. The Eclipse Cannon may not have destroyed the Earth in one fell swoop, but that might have actually been preferable to all the destruction caused by the loss of the moon. Dr. Robotnik's obsession with the telenovela La Última Pasión might seem like a random gag at first glance, but there's actually more going on here beneath the surface. Sonic 3 features multiple scenes of the show, and all of them feature two brothers, both played by Cristo Fernandez, fighting for the affections of the same woman. This culminates in a duel to the death to determine whom she will end up with. This mirrors the betrayal at the heart of the Robotnik family. Sure, Ivo and Gerald aren't fighting over a woman, but their struggle also concludes with a duel to the death. It's eventually revealed during the climax that Gerald betrayed his grandson and was only using him to steal his advanced tech to fulfill his own vengeful desires. Their final fight ends with Ivo killing Gerald by sending him into an energy field.
In the saggy flesh.
But all these parallels will probably go over the head of anyone who's yet to fully develop their skills of literary analysis. Kids might laugh at the telenovela's over-the-top acting and the randomness of Ivo's love for it, but they probably won't clock all the thematic resonance. GUN is an acronym that stands for Guardian Units of Nations, a multinational military organization that was first introduced in the game Sonic Adventure 2. In the latest movie, it funded Gerald Robotnik's project studying Shadow in order for them to exploit the Dark Hedgehog's power as an energy source or weapon. Of course, this plan backfired spectacularly, leading to the death of Maria Robotnik, the arrest of Gerald, and the imprisonment of Shadow. If you're someone who cares about justice, then this all brings up a lot of uncomfortable questions. For example, how is GUN funded? It seems to mainly be headed by US military personnel despite being headquartered in England. So is it an international organization like the United Nations or NATO? Do taxpayers have a say in how the funds are allocated? Or is it somehow privately funded? In the latter case, there would be much less regulatory oversight, though there's still a decent chance that taxpayers would have to supplement the budget. We imagine that the screenwriters don't really have answers to all these questions, considering that this is supposed to be a silly, family-friendly movie. Still, it might be a good idea for parents who take their kids to see Sonic 3 to gently teach them that the exuberant resources used to produce GUN's military technology could have instead gone towards social safety nets, education, and infrastructure. It's made clear throughout Sonic Hedgehog 3 that Shadow was imprisoned by GUN and stuck in suspended animation on a remote island off the coast of Japan for 50 years. This means that his imprisonment began around 1974. That date is made even more explicit when the flashbacks reveal 12-year-old Maria Robotnik, Gerald's granddaughter, who becomes Shadow's only friend in the GUN research facility. It's clear by Maria's fashion sense alone that she's a child of the 70s, as she wears gaudy wool sweaters, bell-bottom jeans, and roller skates. The era is also clear via the use of a vinyl record player, although the song that they listened to, the Traveling Wilburys' End of the Line, wasn't released until 1989. While all of these visual cues are obvious to most adults, they're surely less so to youngsters who weren't alive at the time or haven't watched enough movies or shows that take place in the era. Even something from the 90s that takes place in the 70s, like that 70s show, might be way too outdated to kids today.